I greet you, ladies and gentlemen, at this time. Today, I come before you to present a lecture on international trade. That's the topic that we're going to cover today. We are going to cover quite a number of issues in international trade. Also look at the theories that underpin international trade, as well as the calculations that are associated with those theories. The focus of this lecture is international trade, and it provides the basis for the subsequent coverage of the balance of payments. Some basic terminology and important aspects of international trade are grappled with under this topic. The objectives of this lecture are, number one, to describe the benefits of international trade. Secondly, to outline the key factors that influence international trade. Third, to explain the various types of trade restrictions. And then number four, to recognize the three basic types of exchange rates and understand the components in the balance of payments accounts. Some of the objectives are going to be met in subsequent lectures, not necessarily in this installment. The purpose of this picture is to illustrate the flow of goods and services. For instance, if you check from South America, some goods they are related to East Asia, Southeast Asia. From South Africa, some goods are related to the United States of America. And then from Central America, countries like Mexico, they are related to China and so on. So the purpose of this picture is to illustrate that there is no country on earth which is independent of all other countries or which is self-sufficient. Countries are interdependent, not independent. So we want to see the key terms that we need to master. The first important term when you are looking at international trade is the term imports. It refers to the acquisition of goods and services by a country for sale or to satisfy the diverse needs and wants of the economic agents in that country or economy. Exports refers to the sale of goods and services by a country to another country to satisfy different needs and wants of economic agents found in that country. Exchange rates refers to the price of a nation's currency in terms of another nation's currency. In foreign exchange markets, currencies are reckoned as commodities, and the exchange rate is the price which will be ruling in the foreign exchange market or markets. And then the balance of trade, this is the difference in currency amount or in value between a country's imports and exports. Free trade refers to the international trade left to its natural course without trade restrictions such as tariffs, quotas, and other forms of restrictions, like manipulation of the exchange rate, devaluation of the currency, and all of that stuff. We know absolute or pure free trade does not exist in the real world. What is a tariff? It is a tax which is imposed on imported goods or services. How about a quota? It is a numerical or quantity limit on imports or exports. What about sanction? The term sanction is used a lot in politics, for instance. What are sanctions? It is a trade penalty imposed by one nation onto one or more other nations, usually for political reasons, or even sometimes for economic reasons, to retaliate the implementation of a certain policy. But sometimes sanctions are used to force certain countries to follow certain political systems, like respecting of human rights and all of that stuff. And then what is an embargo? It is a partial or complete prohibition of commerce and trade with a particular country or a group of countries. For instance, for many years, there was an embargo between the United States of America and Cuba. You'll need to check whether that embargo is still in full force. It's your homework. And then we want to look at certain aspects to do with interdependence and specialization. We know that when there is specialization, it leads to interdependence because countries and economic agents will be focusing on a narrow range of products or activities that they can do. Specialization has got both pros and cons. It has merits and demerits. We'll start with the merits. It normally leads to greater efficiency because as a country specializes in particular commodities and industries, it achieves economies of scale, thereby being able to reduce average cost dynamically with the passage of time. So there is greater efficiency in the production of goods and services. And then the consumer naturally benefits because the lower opportunity cost translates to more goods being produced and prices tend to be lower, ceteris paribus in the long run. And then there is opportunities for competitive sectors. Firms gain access to the whole world market because when economies specialize, they are forced to engage in international trade. There are gains to be enjoyed from international trade, and you can follow what is presented in this hypothetical example. But I'll give you another example of, say, Saudi Arabia trading with Botswana. In Saudi Arabia, there is crude oil. In Botswana, there is an abundance of diamonds. In Saudi Arabia, those rich people, because the levels of income are very high in those Gulf or Middle Eastern states, in Saudi Arabia, they may need diamonds to store as a store of wealth or for ornamental purposes. So they will trade with Botswana, exchange oil for diamonds. Just a simplified example. And then the other benefit is that with the specialization, the product range actually increases. There is many things to choose from. And the quality also improves. How about the demerits or the downside? First, threats to uncompetitive industries or sectors. The cheap imports from China has destroyed the textile industry in many countries, which has led to very serious structural unemployment. And then there is the risk of over-specialization, which becomes a problem when global demand shifts. So a glut of certain commodities, which will no longer be necessary, leads to the collapse of certain industries, like the demand for rubber was superseded by the availability of synthetic substitutes, which destroyed the industries that produce rubber or which undermined industries that produce the rubber. Strategic vulnerability, relying on another country for vital resources, makes a country dependent on that country. And then with that comes political manipulation. So you can just look at this diagram or this picture, rather. There is a diagram to the left and then narration on the second column where my cursor is over. If you look at high-income nations, they have 60% of merchandise trade, and then the low and middle income nations, 6%, and then the high income and low income and middle income nations, 34%. So this, you realize that high income nations, they trade more among themselves than with the developing countries. And definitely the extent to which they trade with developing countries is very low. So you can just check from here, if there is total dependence, the potential positive effects are that there is an infusion of the much needed capital from developed nations or those nations with the capital and technology. And then this creates jobs and raises wages. And the technology transfer and the transfer of skills is actually facilitated. But the downturn is that with dependence, now economic problems are transferred from one country to another, and then there is political turmoil. The challenge with independence is that the benefits of depending on other countries, they become lost. You get insulated from political turmoil and economic problems, but you lose much needed capital, the ability to create jobs and raise wages, and the ability to transfer technology from mother countries of technology. And then we go to theories of international trade. There's the absolute advantage theory, which was propounded by Sir Adam Smith. The ability of a nation to produce a good more efficiently than any other nation. Greater output using same or fewer resources. But there is no notion of one country comparing itself to another country. It's just the quantity-based analysis, as it were. And then when we look at comparative advantage, it has to do inability of a nation to produce a good more efficiently than other countries, but an ability to produce that good more efficiently than it does any other good. That's comparative advantage. And then this is an example of US trading partners. Canada, the total exports were smaller than the imports of 346 billion. When it comes to China, the total exports to China, 467. The imports from China are more than the exports to China. You know, most countries that trade with China, they tend to import more from China than they export to China, which is why China has been able to grow. Same goes for Mexico. It seems the balance of trade is tilted heavily against the United States, according to this figure. So the US trade balance has been in deficit 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. It's been in deficit all those years. You can check for the recent figures up to 2021. I think it's still in deficit. And then the pros and cons of international trade. It's a method where countries specialize and they increase their productivity, facilitating the exchange of goods and services between them. So we look at a hypothetical example where simple calculations are done to illustrate the benefits of international trade, according to David Ricardo's comparative advantage theory. David Ricardo extended the ideas of Sir Adam Smith, whose reasoning about patterns of international trade were quantity-based. Nations could benefit from trade based on comparative advantage, not just absolute advantage, as it were. Comparative advantage refers to a country's ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost compared to another country. So here we look at opportunity cost ratios rather than the absolute quantities of commodities. So what are the sources of comparative advantage? Number one, differences in technology. Number two, differences in climate. Number three, differences in factor endowments. Factors of production such as land, labor, and capital. Factor intensity is the factor that is used intensively in production. And these ideas, they are captured in the Excel-all-in model. And then there are other models of international trade. But today, we just focus on the simple model, the two-country, two-products model, which was propounded by David Ricardo. So this is a hypothetical example of a situation between Japan and China, who are neighbors geographically, and who are also neighbors economically. In terms of absolute quantities, we see that Japan produces 8 tons of fish and 4 yards of cloth. China produces 4 tons of fish and 3 yards of cloth. So when you analyze, you realize that Japan has got absolute advantage in the production of both fish and cloth compared to China. This is just a hypothetical example. So according to the prediction of Sir Adam Smith, there is nothing to be gained from international trade in this scenario. But in actual fact, when we reason in terms of comparative advantage, there is everything to gain in a situation like this. So to calculate or to deduce the direction of specialization of the two countries, Japan and China, in terms of these two commodities, fish and cloth, we need to compute what is known as the opportunity cost ratio. But if the opportunity cost ratio table has already been calculated for you, you just need to reason from that table. So when you are reading the text, the literature, or you are reading an examination question, you have to check whether you are dealing with a table of the original quantities of the commodities that are produced, or it's an opportunity cost table. With an opportunity cost table, you don't calculate anything. You look at the figures and you reason. But if you are given the first table, you first of all calculate, which is demonstrated in the table below, where my arrow is overing. So to calculate the opportunity cost of producing a particular commodity, you ask yourself, we are at fish. How much is 1 ton of fish or 1 unit of fish? 1 unit of fish in terms of cloth, it will be 4 yards divided by 8 tons. And then you divide exhaustively into yards of cloth. So 8 into 4, it can't, 0, and then point. 8 into 40 is 5. So we see that 1 unit of fish has an opportunity cost of half a yard of cloth in Japan. And then we go to cloth. We do the same thing. We take 8 tons, it comes as a numerator, 8 tons of fish over 4 yards of cloth. We divide the yards of cloth exhaustively into the tons of fish. So 1 yard of cloth, which is 1 unit of cloth, is equivalent to 2 tons of fish. And then the same method is followed for calculating the opportunity cost ratio for ratios for China. For 1 unit of fish, we simply take the 3 yards of cloth and divide into 4 tons of cloth. So it will be 3 over 4, which is 3/4 of a yard of cloth. That's the opportunity cost of 1 ton of fish in China. And then for the 1 unit of cloth or 1 yard of cloth, we take the 4 tons, it comes as a numerator here, it will be 4 over 3. And then we divide 3 into 4, it goes 1, comma, remainder 1. 3 into 10, it's 3 recurring. 333 recurring. So it's 1.33 ton of fish. And then after we've calculated going down or up, we make the decision horizontally on the opportunity cost term. The calculation is vertical, but the decision making is horizontal. So now we compare for fish, which country has got a lower opportunity cost ratio. In Japan, you forego half a yard of cloth. In China, 3/4 of a yard of cloth. Clearly, Japan has a lower opportunity cost ratio in the production of fish, because in Japan, they forego just a half a yard of cloth. Yet in China, they forego 3/4 of a yard of cloth. In the same vein, when we are reasoning for cloth, for the production of cloth, you realize in Japan, they forego 2 tons of fish to produce 1 yard of cloth. Yet in China, they forego 1.33 tons of fish to produce 1 yard of cloth. Clearly, the opportunity cost ratio for the production of cloth is lower in China than in Japan. So Japan specializes in the production of fish, and China specializes in the production of cloth. This is what is described in the subsequent slides, the narration, which is, so China should export cloth and import fish from Japan instead of fishing itself. So the opportunity cost ratios, they reflect the opportunity cost which is incurred in specialization and hence international trade. Then we look at trade restrictions. Governments from time to time restrict foreign trade to protect domestic consumers. Sometimes consumers and also primarily domestic producers from foreign competition. There are different kinds of barriers to trade, which include tariffs, which are taxes on imported commodities. And then we've got import quotas, which specify the maximum amount of imports allowed within a financial year or within a month. And then we've got non-tariff barriers like licensing requirements, bureaucratic red tape, and so on. And then we've got voluntary export restraints, which are agreements by foreign firms to voluntarily limit their exports to another country to avoid destroying the industries of that country. So the economic impacts of tariffs are as follows. Number one, when a tariff is imposed, domestic consumption declines due to higher prices because it limits foreigners from injecting commodities into the domestic economy. Domestic production is expected to rise, let me put it that way, because of the higher price. Imports may decline, which will serve forex and also protect domestic producers. Government tariff revenue transfers income from consumers to the government. And then indirect effects may also occur in that the relatively inefficient industries will be expanding and relatively efficient industries abroad will be contracting due to the existence of the tariff. So our next port of call will be the balance of payments. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening in. I hope you benefited from this quick run through on this topic of